Sometimes it's not the screaming matches or the betrayals that devastate someone. Sometimes it's the quietest gesture that causes the loudest collapse. You didn't yell. You didn't accuse. You didn't destroy anything. You simply stepped away. You chose silence. You chose a little space. You chose to protect your peace. And suddenly, the other person imploded. They accused. They cried. They lashed out. They fell into panic. To you, it may seem irrational. You ask yourself, why are they reacting like this? I didn't do anything. And that's precisely the point, because it wasn't what you did. It was what you represented. According to Carl Jung, in certain kinds of relationships, especially those governed by unconscious forces, you're not seen as a person, but as a symbol. The other doesn't interact with your actual self. They interact with an internal figure they've assigned you to be. To someone who's unaware of their inner wounds, you become a projection, a mirror that reflects their needs, their fears, their fantasies. You are no longer just you. You are the good mother, the strong father, the protector, the healer, the savior, or even the shadow they refuse to face. In their inner world, your presence isn't just comforting, it's stabilizing. You become a pillar holding up their emotional architecture. So when you decide to take space, the reaction isn't about losing you. It's about losing the illusion. It's not about you walking away. It's about the collapse of what they leaned on to avoid confronting their own chaos. They didn't love you as a full being. They relied on you as a psychic function, a role, a substitute for the structure they never built internally. Attachment theory, as developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, shows us just how deep this goes. People with anxious attachment don't just prefer closeness. They depend on it. They live in constant hypervigilance, scanning for signs of abandonment. Your predictability becomes their sedative. Your presence becomes their emotional glue. When you leave, even just to breathe, they don't lose love. They lose the scaffolding that holds their nervous system together. They interpret your silence not as self-care, but as rejection. Your distance not as boundary, but as betrayal. The collapse that follows, it's the collapse of their own identity. Because when you've been assigned the role of emotional stabilizer, your exit becomes existential. Psychologist Margaret Mahler calls this a forced birth. In early development, infants do not see themselves as separate beings. There is no me and you. There is only fusion. The caregiver's presence, existence itself. Separation, therefore, is death-like. It is trauma. It is annihilation. And many adults, never having fully integrated this developmental process, replay it in adult relationships. They never completed emotional separation. They still cling, still fuse, still turn others into psychic extensions of themselves. So when you withdraw, even gently, even kindly, you don't just leave. You trigger a wound they never healed. A childhood cry inside an adult body. Don't leave me alone. I don't know who I am without you. Jung warned of this deeply human tendency to project the unmet, unexplored parts of ourselves onto others. We make others responsible for our wholeness. We make others the guardian of our balance. But this isn't love. It's dependence dressed in devotion. You were not seen as a partner. You were seen as an anchor. And the more unconscious the person, the more fused they are with the illusion. The more they demand from you, the less they face in themselves. That's why they collapse. Not because you betrayed them, but because you stopped holding up their illusion. Think about it. Why did they call you selfish when you asked for space? Why did they accuse you of abandonment when you needed quiet? Why did they panic when you finally prioritized your own inner peace? Because you weren't just someone to them. You were the function, the supporter, the mirror, the container, the emotional sedative. And when that function leaves, the illusion disintegrates. And what's left? A terrifying void. Let's be clear. This doesn't mean they are evil. It means they are fragmented. They never learned to self-regulate. They never faced their inner emptiness. And you were the placeholder until you couldn't be anymore. So yes, the collapse is real. The pain is genuine. But it's not proof of love. It's proof of dependency. Their suffering doesn't mean you were wrong to leave. It means they never learned how to stay whole without you. This is why Jung said, "We are all born originals, but we die copies." Not because life forces us to lose ourselves, but because we unconsciously trade who we are for the roles others expect us to play. You didn't leave because you stopped loving. You left because you could no longer carry a symbolic identity that never belonged to you in the first place. You stepped out of the role. You dropped the mask. And in doing so, you triggered a truth they weren't ready to face. That what they needed was never you. It was themselves. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into what happens when these symbolic projections intertwine with anxious attachment, when you're not just a mirror, but a lifeline. Because in some relationships, your silence is interpreted not just as absence, but as destruction. And understanding that difference is the key to reclaiming your emotional freedom. When someone with an anxious attachment style finds comfort in you, it often feels flattering at first. They want to be close. They always check in. They call you their peace, their calm, their everything. But over time, that closeness begins to feel like a storm wrapped in a hug. And you start realizing something terrifying. You are not being loved. You are being held onto. Attachment, as described by John Bowlby, is not merely about affection. It's about emotional survival. From infancy, our nervous systems are shaped by the availability or absence of consistent emotional care. Some children grow up knowing they are safe. Others grow up watching for the smallest sign of abandonment. The latter become hyper-attuned, anxious, and emotionally enmeshed. To them, love is not comfort. Love is vigilance. Love is a threat always waiting to happen. Mary Ainsworth, Bowlby's research partner, discovered this in her famous strange situation experiments. Anxiously attached, children would erupt into panic if their caregiver left the room. Not just tears, total disorganization. And when the caregiver returned, the child would display both desperation and anger, clinging and striking at the same time. Now here's the key insight. This behavior doesn't end in childhood. It evolves into adult patterns, messier, more hidden, but just as intense. The anxiously attached adult doesn't just want you, they need you to soothe their system. Your voice, your tone, your schedule, your consistency. It becomes their oxygen. You become their emotional regulator. When you respond quickly, they breathe. When you go quiet, they spiral. When you cancel a meeting, they interpret rejection. When you ask for space, they hear abandonment. It doesn't matter how kind you are, how loving, how loyal. The anxious system isn't listening to your actions. It's listening to its trauma. To this person, your predictability equals their safety. You may think you're just being yourself. But in their world, you're a medic, a sedative, a tether to psychological ground they never developed on their own. That's why they react so dramatically when you pull away. Because it's not just you walking out the door. It's the collapse of the illusion that they are okay. And here lies the double bind. You were never meant to carry that responsibility. But now you are. Not by agreement, but by projection. As Jung warned, the unconscious doesn't see people. It sees archetypes. And if someone never emotionally separated from their earliest caregivers, they will fuse you into the missing piece. You are no longer a partner. You are the psychic substitute for the mother that wasn't nurturing enough, the father that was unpredictable, the bond that was lost too soon. When this happens, your presence becomes necessary, not cherished, and your autonomy becomes threatening. You ask for a quiet evening to yourself. They accuse you of being distant. You pull back from an overwhelming conversation. They panic that you're preparing to leave them. You try to communicate a boundary, and they cry, rage, accuse, or manipulate, not because they are evil, but because they're terrified. You're not leaving them. You're pulling out the very foundation they're standing on, and they never built one of their own. Psychologist Margaret Mahler called this moment forced birth. In childhood, we're meant to gradually move from symbiosis to separation. First, the baby fuses with the caregiver. Then, step by step, they start forming a sense of me and you. This is where selfhood is born. This is where boundaries begin. But if that separation is broken, rushed, or never supported, the child grows up unfinished. They don't just seek connection. They merge. They don't just fall in love. They attach like an organ. And when that fusion is disturbed, by you needing space, by you setting limits, They react not with logic, but with panic. So what happens when you, unknowingly, become the stand-in for that missing early bond? You are no longer loved for who you are. You are used, often unconsciously, to prevent psychic collapse. Your presence cares safety, your voice, soothing, your consistency, survival. But here's the tragedy. Your needs, your individuality, your inner life, they disappear in this equation. At the beginning, this person might adore you. They call you healing. They shower you with affection. But what they are really saying is, don't ever change. Don't ever leave. Don't ever need anything I can't provide. And if you dare to shift, even for your own growth, they feel attacked. That's when the dark side of anxious attachment emerges. Emotional blackmail. You don't care about me anymore. Strategic guilt. I guess I never mattered. Explosive anger. After everything I did for you. Silent punishment. Withdrawal. Coldness. Playing the victim. And you start to feel like a hostage. Now let's be clear. This doesn't mean you owe them more. It means you owe yourself a reality check. You cannot fix what they never built. You cannot carry what was never yours. You cannot fuse with someone and still breathe. Because the truth is, you were never responsible for holding them together. And here's what no one tells you. Your distance is not cruelty. Your silence is not betrayal. Your boundaries are not abuse. They're necessary. You cannot become the cost of someone else's stability. That's not love. That's emotional colonization, where your personhood is erased in service to another's comfort. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when that colonization is threatened, when you, the stable figure, finally step away, when control begins to crack, when manipulation replaces connection, when guilt becomes the tool to bring you back. Because while your departure may look like heartbreak, what it really breaks is their illusion of control. And the moment you say no is the moment everything hidden begins to rise. There's a moment in every unhealthy relationship when the mask falls. Not dramatically, not with a bang, but quietly. When you say one honest sentence, I need space. And suddenly, the relationship you thought was rooted in care reveals something else. Not love, not connection, but control. It starts subtly. A sigh, a shift in tone, a vague comment like, you're so different lately. Then it grows. You get accused of being selfish, of being cold, of having changed, not because you did something cruel, but because you reclaimed yourself. You stepped away from the emotional contract you never signed. You interrupted the cycle. You broke the predictability. And now the other person doesn't know how to function. Here's the secret no one teaches. In many codependent bonds, love is not unconditional. It's transactional. You give me comfort. I give you approval. You reflect my needs. I validate your presence. You sacrifice your boundaries. I grant you closeness. But the moment you stop performing, the system goes into chaos. Not because you hurt them, but because you exposed the truth. The relationship wasn't mutual. It was an arrangement, an unspoken deal. Be who I need you to be, and I'll keep you safe. When you set a boundary, you break that deal. And what happens next is a reaction, not a response. You'll see behaviors like sudden anger, aimed not at your actions, but at your autonomy. Emotional blackmail, masked as vulnerability. I don't know how to live without you. Immoral inversion. After everything I've done for you, how could you be so cruel? Strategic victimhood, withdrawing just enough to make you feel guilty. Let's call it what it is. A control mechanism. Because when someone has built their identity on your compliance, your independence is a threat. Not because you betrayed them, but because they can no longer use you as an emotional scaffold. Psychologically, this is a collapse of the illusion of control. As Jung noted, where real love exists, there is freedom. But where fear dominates, love mutates into manipulation. And when your presence has been reduced to a tool to regulate someone else's pain, mood, identity, then your absence will not feel like a loss. It will feel like a rebellion. That's why your silence feels like violence to them. That's why your autonomy is framed as betrayal. That's why they react not with grief, but with pressure, demands, accusations, tears that come not from sorrow, but from losing power. And this is what so many mistake for love. But love doesn't demand emotional obedience. Love doesn't require self-erasure. Love doesn't ask you to shrink in order to make someone else feel secure. If you find yourself doubting, wondering, am I the villain here? It's likely because the guilt has been projected onto you. You were made to believe that taking care of yourself was selfish, that protecting your mental space was abandonment, that your no meant you didn't care. But ask yourself, who benefits when you doubt yourself? Who gets safer when you get smaller? Who feels more in control when you feel guilty? That's not love. That's emotional dependency wrapped in righteousness. This is where many people give up. They break, then return. They think, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I overreacted. They apologize. They try harder. They shrink back into the mold they almost escaped from. Because the pain of disappointing someone often feels worse than the pain of disappointing yourself. But this trade-off has a price. Your boundaries, gone. Your identity, merged. Your autonomy, muted. And the cycle resets. If you've lived this, you know how exhausting it is. You're not in a relationship. You're in a performance. One wrong word, one new boundary, one unexpected emotion, and the entire system trembles. Because it was never built to hold two whole people. It was built to hold one compliant person and one dependent one. Here's the hardest truth. If someone only feels safe when you are small, it means they never loved you. They loved your usefulness. You were a mirror. You were the ground. You were the illusion of calm. And now that you've stepped back, they are not grieving you. They are grieving the loss of control. But you are not here to be someone's mirror. You are not here to be someone's medication. You are not here to be the oxygen mask for someone unwilling to breathe on their own. You are here to be whole, and wholeness, by nature, disrupts dependency. In the next and final part, we'll explore what happens when you stay gone, when you don't return to the cycle, when you choose growth over guilt, and how that rupture, as painful as it is not just an ending, it's a beginning for both of you, if they choose to face the mirror. There comes a moment, often quiet, rarely celebrated, when you finally stop explaining yourself. You no longer justify your distance. You no longer negotiate your boundary. You no longer apologize for choosing peace over performance. And that's the moment you become free, not in the loud, dramatic, movie-worthy way, but in the quiet, internal rupture that says, I choose to be whole, even if it means being misunderstood. At first, guilt roars. You see the pain in their eyes. You hear the words, you abandoned me. You changed. You've become selfish. And part of you believes it. You question yourself. You wonder if maybe it would have been easier to stay, to keep holding, to keep being the support beam for someone else's unfinished architecture. But then you breathe, and in that breath, you remember. This pain, this heartbreak, is not born from your cruelty. It's born from their dependency. You didn't break them. You broke their illusion. As Jung reminds us, individuation, the process of becoming yourself, requires rupture. You must break the masks. You must shatter the projections. You must walk away from roles that were never yours to play. This is the cost of growth. People who once adored you will now resent you, not because you harmed them, but because your clarity exposes their dependence. Your boundaries reveal their control. Your distance reflects their unfinished inner world. You become a threat, not because of what you did, but because of what you no longer allow. But here is the deeper truth. You were never responsible for their foundation. You were never supposed to be their parent, their savior, their emotional regulator. You were meant to walk beside them, not beneath them. If they collapse without you, it does not mean you failed. It means they must now face the void you once unknowingly filled. And yes, it will hurt. They will cry. They will rage. They may even try to make you the villain. But that pain is necessary. It is the doorway to their own transformation if they choose to walk through it. But their healing is not your burden. Your job is not to cushion every fall. Your role is not to self-destruct in order to preserve someone else's emotional narrative. Because true love, true connection, can only happen between two whole people, not one whole and one half. Not a giver and a taker, not a savior and someone desperate to be saved. This is why walking away is not abandonment. It's liberation for both. They are now free to build what they never had, to find internal stability, to explore their wounds, to face their shadow, to finally become the person they hoped you could be for them. And you are now free to be you, not a symbol, not a function, not a projection, just you, whole, solid, real. So if this is where you are, feeling torn, feeling guilty, feeling judged, remember this. You are not walking away from love. You are walking away from illusion, from emotional colonization, from the invisible contract that said, your peace belongs to me. And now you say, no, it belongs to me. Write it, whisper it, shout it if you must. I choose to be whole, not to hurt, but to heal, not to dominate, but to live honestly. And those who truly love you will rise to meet you there, not in the comfort of fusion, but in the beauty of real connection, where love does not demand self-abandonment, but celebrates mutual selfhood. Because freedom isn't selfish, it's sacred. And this is the final act of love.